Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Labour Justice Barometer podcast. I'm Aisha Adam.
And I'm Debbie Collier.
And we're your hosts today on the Labour Justice Barometer. In Season 2 of the Labour Justice Barometer, we shift gears to focus on initiatives that impact on or are targeted at a collective level. So, in September 2015, the heads of state adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals to be achieved by 2030, with a framework of indicators and monitoring systems. While there have been development gains during the past decade, progress has been fragile and uneven against the backdrop of escalating conflicts and rising inequality. In each month of Season 2, we are going to highlight an aspect of SDGs impacting on labour justice.
October is Mental Health Awareness Month, and the 10th of October is World Mental Health Day. So today we are delighted to welcome Hanlie to speak to us about a digital harassment tool which is concerned with the mental health impact of harassment and violence in the world of work. Hanlie has held directorships at various multinationals as well as regional and local companies. She is the author of a book on impossible bosses. Hanlie has also designed and deployed a digital harassment tool which is designed for the South African labour market. From a world of work perspective, Hanlie's harassment tool relates to the ILO's Convention 190 on the elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work, adopted in 2019. And it speaks to the requirement for harassment risk assessment in South Africa's 2022 Harassment Code, issued under the Employment Equity Act, which has a requirement under Item 8.1 of the Code for employers to assess the risk of harassment in their workplaces. Hanlie, welcome to episode 1 of season 2 of the Labour Justice Barometer. Tell us a little bit about the harassment risk assessment tool. What is it? How does it work? And what motivated its development?
Thank you, Debbie. Lovely to be here. The harassment risk assessment tool is a digital, anonymous harassment risk assessment, which we run over various channels using SMS, WhatsApp, email, links, whatever a company require, in order to enable employees to voice the level of harassment that they experience at work. So we ask them 18 questions, and they respond by indicating how frequently they experience the type of harassment, and then also, importantly, what the impact is on them. From that, we produce a multidimensional dashboard, which is similar to an enterprise risk dashboard, and we're able to, for a company, rank the types of harassment from high to low. We also calculate an harassment risk index, which essentially means that the number will indicate on average how many types of harassment the participants experienced per person.
Hanlie, just to ask and to follow up on that, what motivated this tool's development?
My corporate experience has got a lot to do with my passion for this. So having worked in enterprise risk management, a love for technology and data and the insights being created from data really drove me towards this path, because the moment that I understood that 8.1 requires one to do an harassment risk assessment, I realized there is no way that a company can do this without technology. From a trust point of view, employees won't trust the system. Having written the book, I understood that the impact of employees on each other ultimately impact on the high performance or low performance of a company. So I'm passionate about high-performing organizations and the elements that make it tick. And in my mind, high performance is a function of people times the environment. And harassment impact both on people and the environment. Also, to give employees a voice, which they often don't have, in these situations, together with providing a conclusive outcome to management to take decisions and to take action. Because if you put fuzzy assumptions and we assume in front of the exec, they can't take decisions. Whereas if you put numbers before them, they're able to make decisions, and it's very hard to argue with numbers.
So Hanlie, tell us a little bit more about the types of harassment that are prevalent and that show up when you deploy this tool. And what are these surprising results that are showing up for you?
Yes, we've deployed it in more than 40 companies in South Africa, different industries, retail, manufacturing, IT, food and beverage, supply chain, so a wide range. And it has been nothing short of fascinating. Initially, I thought that, this is compliance and, we're producing numbers, we're producing a view that employers can work with. However, what came out of it is almost like a lucky packet every time you open up a data set. So when we ranked the harassment types for South Africa, combining all the data sets, given our macro environment, I was completely surprised about the outcome. Given the gender-based violence and the bribery and tender fraud and all our challenges, I expected that to be right at the top. It was not. It's different harassment types that are at the top. In addition, we realized that all companies aren't equal. So because we calculate an harassment risk index, we've got a benchmark for South Africa, and then we can compare a company to the benchmark for South Africa as a whole, but also enable a company to use their own index to compare different departments, different geographies to their own benchmark. So 2 benchmarks that we help them with. It was also clear that within a company, all departments and all geographies aren't equal as well. The other interesting thing was that the pervasiveness of the risk is different. For South Africa, we've got a number out of 10, a number of people that experience harassment, and for every company, we could track it being over and under. And that really makes you wonder, what is different? Why would it be so different from one company to the other? The big surprise to me was right at the top of the list is sarcasm. Secondly, discrimination. Third from the top, and now this is for the whole of South Africa, is humiliation. Now, some companies vary a little bit from that, but sarcasm features throughout. Right at the bottom, almost for every company, is sexual harassment. We test on 2. One is touching, the other is images, and bribery. And one need to reflect on that. If one think about it, for many years now, when the code was still the sexual harassment code, the first training that you receive as employee within the first 2 weeks in a company is the sexual harassment training and the anti-bribery training. And I think this is quite celebratory for HR practitioners because the data shows that those efforts have actually worked. So that was the first surprise. If we look at the risk index, for South Africa, the average risk index is 1.8. So this means that on average, every participant experience almost 2 extreme or high harassment types out of the 18. However, some companies were as low as 0.02, and then others were as high as 6. That makes you wonder, what is different? What are the practices? The other interesting point was we also asked a question about whether employees are aware of the procedures and policy in terms of harassment. And that came out as quite a high risk, that they actually are not aware of it, which I think indicate that there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of the corporates educating their employees on this. Another interesting thing, the concentration risk that I mentioned before. On average, in South Africa, if you sat in a meeting with 10 people, 3 of the attendees experience at least 1 extreme or high risk. However, in some companies, this spiked to 6 out of 10, which is quite a systemic setup. And that means that ultimately you'll require a lot of effort. It's systemic in the company. Others had as low as 0.1 out of 10. So industries differ, departments differ, companies differ. And if I'm an employee, I really would love to know what the risk index, the harassment risk index of a company is before I join them. The other interesting thing was that all occupational levels aren't the same. And we're actually able to calculate a multidimensional data point where we're able to look at race, gender, and occupational level. And when we look at that in terms of a dashboard, there's clear hotspots. In particular, senior managers, African women, experience a risk almost twice the risk of the average harassment risk index in the market. The same with senior managers, Indian women in the workplace. What was also interesting is that the types of harassment that they are concerned about differs from the top 3. If a company follows a one-shoe-fits-all approach, they'll probably won't move the dial on reducing harassment.
And Lee, you talk about some companies having particularly high and systemic levels of harassment. This sounds quite problematic and perhaps more difficult to shift. And it must surely have consequences for organizations. Do you have a view on this?
If one look back, there's quite a few companies that has experienced large governance failures. And in the investigations afterwards, it was clear that harassment played a very important role in suppressing what was raised. A few examples. If one look at the Titan submersible that went down to the Titanic and imploded and resulted in loss of life, that company, 2 or 3 engineers that reported significant concerns of safety. However, they were suppressed through the tool of harassment and kept quiet. If one look at Boeing has had a few catastrophic failures and large loss of life. And the same, key employees who raised safety concerns were bullied to a degree where one of them took their own lives. If one look at accounting fraud, Enron and Steinhoff, the literature and what has been looked at in terms of post-event investigations made it clear that bullying and harassment were used to keep people intact and not raise concerns. So I think this is quite revealing, because the question is, if external stakeholders and boards and shareholders had an harassment risk assessment to rely on, would they not have seen that there is something that shows them red flags beyond the normal internal management controls, internal audit controls, the level 2 type of controls, and external audit controls? And I think there's a lot of work to be done to dig deeper into this, to assist companies to identify hotspots where they could have safety failures or fraud.
So, Hanlie, how would you like to see the harassment tool developing? How do you see it evolving, and how would you like to see it evolving?
The data showing us that sexual harassment and bribery could be brought into, it's still there, but it's quite low in every single company that participated. It shows that the guardrails that companies put in place actually work in the workplace. It removes the bad choices. I think companies have almost fallen into the trap of talking about toxicity in the workplace, but with the approach of nothing can be done. That is what companies should do right from the start, is from the top publish a statement that says we've got a 0 tolerance for harassment in the workplace. So taking a data-driven approach, it gives one numbers to work on. It gives one specifics to spend your resources on. And I think this can change the narrative completely. So one see a lot being written on toxic workplaces, quiet quitting, and so on. However, very little is written about how do we solve it. And I think it is because we haven't had numbers, we haven't had hard facts to act on. So I also find that, when one speaks to employees and even managers in companies, there's very little awareness of the new code. People still perceive it only to be sexual harassment, and they don't realize that it's now actually, from a definition point of view, psychological harassment as well. So there's a lot of work to be done, but the awareness is starting to rise to a point where employees are starting to understand there's actually much more. At this stage, I don't think they know their rights, and they don't know what harassment is in the broader sense right now. So a lot of work to be done from that point of view.
You're listening to the Labour Justice Barometer, and we'll be right back. So, based on everything you've told us already, Hanlie, would you say that in your view, are we actually making a dent in the harassment problem? Would you say it's improving? Is it getting worse? Or is it mostly just becoming more visible?
First of all, what has been clear to us is that there's advocacy required in the market to change the narrative from these toxic workplaces to we can actually do something. We also partnered with universities because we realized that if a company now finds that sarcasm is their top concern, one need to have applicable training available in order to address that. Because the question is, and that is why research is required as well, is sarcasm maybe sexual harassment being redirected, because people know that there would be consequences for sexual harassment, but it now changed to innuendos. So a lot of research to be done, a lot of training to be developed as part of this as well. But then rolling this out globally, we've set the tool up at this stage in 6 different languages, and we're able to add any language that we need to. It still pulls through to a data view. And with this, I would like to see it being an index that gets published in every country where companies compete for the top 10 positions because of the confidence that I've got in the corporates, having seen how they have managed to bring down sexual harassment and bribery, this can be solved as well.
Before we end off, Asha, perhaps we should reflect on the digital harassment tool and how it measures on our labour justice barometer. We've heard from Hanlie how the tool relates to the SDGs in terms of gender, equality and decent work, the SDGs 5, 8 and 10. How does it relate to our labour justice barometer?
Well, I think definitely it's a green. The tool itself is a green. I think sitting on where it is and the impact it's already going to, from the data and from the work that Hanlie's already generated, from her work, within workplaces and the different sectors, I can definitely say it's definitely targeting green and sitting on the needle of green. But I do think what it's shown is that harassment is still very prevalent. It's still something that is not going away anytime soon. And like Hanlie said, it all starts with a conversation. So it still leaves the needle on the red when it comes to harassment in the workplace. But overall, I think the tool is a green, for sure.
Definitely. It gives both executives and employees the opportunity to change the dial on this. So in my mind, definitely a green.
Thank you so much, Hanlie, for being our first guest on season 2 of our podcast. And, for all the insights that you shared, we will definitely leave all of this info in our description box for all our listeners to see the amazing work that Hanlie is doing. Debbie, I will see you in the next one. And here's to season 2.
Thanks, Asha. Yes, see you in episode 2.
Thank you so much for inviting me to share this with you, and I look forward to talking again.
Hopefully, Hanlie, we can convince you to come back.
I'd be happy to, and let's change the narrative together.
This podcast is not intended to constitute legal advice.